Today I'm going to make a 2-part silicone mold of this. This is an antique elevator call button plate. Since this is an actual antique, it would be a shame to use it on a set and potentially have something bad happen to it. If a replica gets destroyed, and as long as I have the mold, I can always make a new one. For this project, I decided to cover my workbench in cardboard. I'm going to start by making a box for the mold. I usually like to use styrofoam because it's easy to work with, but that usually results in a fuzzy looking mold, and for this project, I'm going to need it to be smooth. When I cut the base of the box, I made sure that I left room around the sides for the wood that I plan to use. I also left room for a gap of about 1/2 inch of silicone all the way around the mold subject. I made sure to seal all of the seams. Silicone is very sneaky and cannot be trusted. If I'm not careful, it'll leak out of a pinhole if I don't seal the box properly. When I cut the sides for the box, I made sure to allow for enough room to have 1/2 inch of silicone above and below the plate, just like I had done for the sides. The next thing that I'm going to do is add a layer of clay over top the styrofoam that I just placed into the box. The clay will allow me to carve registration dimples and lines into it. If I had tried to do so with the styrofoam, it would have been very difficult and probably not given the desired end result. Before I place the plate down into the clay, I need to plug up the holes in the face of the plate. If I don't, the silicone will fill the empty space inside the plate and ruin the mold. For this step of making this mold, I only want to cast the front of the plate at this time. The back will be cast a little bit later. Now that the plate is set into the clay, I used my Mr. Happy pen to press a perfectly round dimple into the clay that I had used to cover the holes for the buttons. These dimples will be used as registration points to make the 2 halves of the mold line up when casting. I used a sculpting tool to cut registration grooves into the clay along the sides and along the top and bottom of the plate. Next, I used an oval-shaped marker to make a dimple in one corner and a round marker to make dimples in the other 3 corners. I deliberately made the dimples asymmetrical so that the 2 halves of the mold can only go together one way. Time to glove up. I calculated the volume of my mold box and the volume of my mixing container to determine how much silicone I would need for this project. I intentionally mixed a little bit extra so I had some left over to pour into some overpour molds. The swirling colors and the consistency makes me think of taffy, except if I ate this, it would kill me. I'm going to pour a thin layer of silicone over the face of the plate and let it sit for a while. This allows many of the bubbles to pop and will hopefully make the silicone closest to the mold subject as bubble-free as possible. I used a sharpened popsicle stick to attempt to pop any bubbles that may have been trapped in the corners of the plate. Next, I'm going to pour a bit more silicone off to the side of the mold subject so that I hopefully don't introduce any bubbles into the layer that I had poured previously. I'm going to let this bit of silicone settle for a while before I pour the final amount of silicone. Now that the first half of silicone has cured completely, it's time to open up the bottom of the mold box. Well, that doesn't seem to be working. I think that what this needs is more power. Now that's the ticket. Now that I have the bottom of the mold open, I'll need to clean out all the clay to prepare to pour the second half of this mold. There's only so much that I can clean with my sculpting tool. A nice scrub down and a shower will finish the cleaning job. All clean. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a defect in the plate that I'm casting. Originally, there was a similar two-part mold like the one that I'm making, which was used to make the plate. However, when this plate was made, those two halves were not lined up properly, and one side is thicker than the other. Before I cast the back half of this plate, I'm going to attempt to thicken one side with some clay, which will hopefully give my castings some extra strength. It's not going to be pretty, but it'll get the job done. Now that I've corrected the defect, it's time to add some pour spouts and air vents. I've cut some short wooden dowels that I'm going to hot glue to the plate in spots that would be most likely to trap air. Before I pour any silicone, I need to make sure that I coat everything with a good amount of molding release agent. If I had forgotten to do this step, I would end up with a nice block of silicone with an elevator plate encased inside of it. Again, I calculated the volume of the inside of the mold box and the volume of the inside of my mixing container, and I mixed a little extra to pour in some additional molds on the side. Ooh, so swirly. As before, I pour a thin layer of silicone and let it sit for a bit to let the bubbles pop. Now that looks like a pretty successful mold to me. Every detail was captured in the mold, even this minor defect that is a part of the original plate. So now that my silicone mold is done, the final step that I need to do before I can make something with my new mold is to make a box that clamps the top and bottom halves together. When I cut the sides for the box, I made sure to make the sides a little bit shorter than the silicone mold. That way, when I screw the lid on, it will securely press the two halves together. I overfilled the mold with resin because the pressure from the pressure chamber will push the resin into any voids in the mold. If I didn't pour extra resin and use my pressure chamber, I would end up getting only a partial casting. Well, would you look at that? It came out almost perfect. I broke the nubs off and then super glued them back onto the casting. When they broke off, they took small pieces of the casting with them. A little cleanup on my grinder, and I'm all done. It's actually a thin casting, and it ended up being kinda see-through. Sometimes even a fun project like this one can have its ups and its downs. I'll see you next time.